Welcome to The Secret Witch Show, the podcast providing a safe and alchemical altar space of conversations which help powerful women escape a half-hearted, spiritless society and rediscover the freedom of living a wildly magical life. Every other week, we explore how to cast aside the wounds of shame, guilt, and fear connected with fully being yourself, so you can grant yourself permission to stop hiding, ground soulfully back into your body, illuminate your whole soul desires, tend your soul, rediscover and reclaim your powerful gifts, express your magic, and manifest your wildest alchemy. There's no better place to become who your heart longs to be. This is where we will guide you into liberation. I'm your host, Nicole Barton, and I'm so excited to dive in. Welcome, my loves. I am so delighted to be sharing today's episode with you. This particular topic has been really close to my heart as I journeyed deeply with chronic fatigue to the point of paralysis several times in my life. So I really can't wait for you to listen and share what you feel in response. So please do, when you've listened to it, reach out, please share. I love to hear from women and what they've heard in this. I'm also super excited to share what our team has recently been magically creating. Like, it's honestly the most beautiful but also most impactful resource that I've ever seen, and I'm so excited that it's in the world. It's called our starter pack, and honestly it is so deeply serving but also looks stunning. That probably matters less to you than it does to me. I was super excited about it, but it's really potent. It's a really potent resource, and it guides women deeply into those tender first steps into the path of becoming a healer. So I love to give as much away to people as I can for free, which is why I do the podcast. But also, this resource has all the free resources in it. So it's got the illumination workbook, which is really to help you dive into some of the common fears of sensitive aspiring healers. It's also got our free Taste of Healing Journey with Archetypal Rosa, and it's also got links to our press features, our blogs, some of the most important podcasts to listen to, and free workshops around how the magical technology, the path, works. So it's got everything you could possibly need to understand either the archetypal apothecary and how it works, or the common fears that come up in this journey, and guide you into as well. There's some real kind of self-illumination questions and resources and inquiries, practices, rituals in there for you to be able to really dive into the work. I'm going to invite you to download it so you can also get a taster of everything we do by heading to nicolebarton.co.uk/sign-up. We're also just birthing another group journey, so check that out on our website too. But for now, on The Secret Witch Show today, I am speaking to one of the common fears that comes up for aspiring healers, the deep fears of absorbing others' energy and burning out that often stop women from fully stepping into the journey of becoming a healer, thinking that they're too sensitive for it. In this episode, I explore how women born to be healers are born with a deep sensitivity naturally, and what this really means for them, exploring the natural constitution of a healer, along with a way of working with reclaiming the deep self-honouring that's required and the capacity to hold inner boundaries in order to reclaim our gifts without burning out and taking on others' energy. I also explore the deeper underlying fear that often stops us from fully self-honouring and protecting our energy. Let's dive in. Hello, my loves. Welcome to the episode, How to Be a Healer as a Sensitive Soul Who Absorbs Others' Energy Without Burning Out. And I'm going to be honest, this episode could have gone so many ways. And then I was out for a wild wander yesterday and a remedy just came to me, and she was kind of snapping at my heels, and I'm not going to tell you what remedy she is until we get to later. But she's thrown me into a bit of oblivion in many levels, because she was actually scheduled for being served to the world later on this year, and I'm really feeling her calling to be served next. And so, in many ways, she's being the medicine that she's here to be, which will make a bit more sense later when I share more. And I will share a little bit more about that as well, because it feels quite vulnerable to be like, okay, well, I haven't got all my eggs in one basket because it was all logical and lined up, and now this curveball. So there's me with my raw vulnerable share to begin with. And also a great example of how we can truly honour what we're being called to by soul. So let's dive in anyway, because what I want to talk about first is a remedy, an archetypal remedy that tends to be the kind of natural constitution, the natural makeup of a woman who is born here to be a healer, and that's archetypal phosphorus. So for those of you who are listening to this episode, I'm going to take a guess, and it may not be the case for all of you, but on the whole, women who are born to be healers tend to be what we call archetypal phosphorus constitution. Phosphorus is the substance on the end of a match. It ignites really quickly. It's very deeply sensitive. But also, when she's learned to reclaim that work, that beauty of phosphorus, it's very radiant, holds up that shiny torch and shines a light for others. So particularly around like being the healer and how this is how you can heal yourself. So why I share that is because sensitivity and burnout, you think of a match, the kind of energetic of a match burning down, that is who phosphorus is. Those tend to be her wounds, this kind of sensitivity, deep sensitivity, and this sense of burnout. And because of those wounds, women will often feel this sense of like absorbing other energy, the energy of other people. And those who are here to be healers and beginning to tenderly step into that often then will hit up against all the fear of that and be like, okay, well, I'm clearly not here to be a healer because of this fear of burning out, because of this fear of absorbing other people's energy. And I hear it over and over again. It breaks my heart. It's like, I know I've got gifts, but I'm too open. I need to protect my energy. And my whole modality, my whole message is really about letting women know that's not true. Like, this deep sensitivity of yours and even the burnout is not a sign that you're not here to be a healer. It's actually the very opposite. And my own journey has been that of reclaiming the gifts from my own chronic fatigue syndrome. Like, I was unable to walk at one point. And I was thinking about that in the kind of designing of this episode and in the kind of natural journey of where I'm guiding women at the moment. You know, we've worked with archetypal rose, it's very much about softening and opening. We've worked with aura, which is very much about reclaiming our power. And there's like an element, I think, that I'm going to speak to in today's, which is like there's another aspect of this inner healing, inner wounded healer healing. And I'll share more on that in a moment. But in essence, the fear of being sensitive, the fear of burning out, the fear of our energy kind of, not being protected and absorbing other people's energy is not a sign that you're not here to be a healer. What it's really a sign of is that there's just more healing to do of your inner wounded healer. And as I say, I often refer to my time with chronic fatigue syndrome as like my initiation into becoming a healer. And I think that's so important because we can so often look at these wounds of burnout, this kind of exhaustion, as like a sign that we can't do something, whereas actually, if we work with it magically, it's like an initiation that's calling us to reclaim some lost parts of our soul that we haven't been honouring. I'll talk more about that as well. But before we do, one of the underlying principles of my work is the element of soul alchemy. And the whole principle of that really is the fact that we're here to alchemize our wounds into gold, which is what I was just talking about with the initiation. Alchemy itself is the magical creation and transformation of lead to gold. Our own darkness works the same. We're basically in the work here of learning to heal ourselves so that our darkness becomes our gift. There's kind of the whole journey of the 3 steps of the archetypal apothecary path, in which we start with the healing, which is that conversion, that alchemy of our darkness into gifts, and that's how we discover the gifts in that process and then learn to express them in the world. So there's like 3 steps in this modality. The alchemy of our darkness into our light, into our gifts, is part of that. And the reason for that is because another principle of our work and a universal law, if you like, that underlies it is this idea of like cures like. This is one of the foundational principles of our work. And what that means is that like literally cures like. We in our healed form will naturally help activate and cure, if you like, others who are similar to us. So the actual principle is Similius Similibus. There's a magical healing law. And yeah, in essence, it means that we heal others by sharing the healed scars for our own journey of alchemy. In other words, our unique gifts are found in our wounds, and the work is to embody the healing of that for ourselves so that we can go on to serve others into their own healing if we're here to be a healer. And that really is a journey of becoming. That's why our whole modality kind of guides you into those 3 steps of healing, discovery, and expression. And of course, there are many wounds of the healer. Phosphorus, as a healer, the wounded healer, has her own wounds. She's essentially the wounded healer archetypal remedy, if you like. And as I said, she's kind of like the energy of a match. There's an archetype. She's like an archetype being like a mirror, a reflection, a personality profile, if you like. So if you think about the energy contained within the substance on the end of a match, like you strike it, it's deeply sensitive and it'll burn down to the ground. But if you can alchemize and heal this wound of being so deeply sensitive to everything, and when I say sensitive, that can be to lights, to smells, to sounds, to all the things in everyday life. But there's also in phosphorus this deep openness and sensitivity to other worlds. You know, we have all the clairvoyance, all the clair skills, clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience. There's this kind of deep ability to feel and sense things that maybe other people who aren't a phosphorus constitution and have a different constitution, because there are many, their soul gifts will be something very different, and could also be something quite mundane. Is there's this like deep sensitivity to other worlds in phosphorus, and that therefore explains why, as healers, as sensitive ones, we're actually are tending to absorb others' energy. Like there's this tendency, this sensitivity to others' energy, and it's this that actually makes us a good healer. It's just that largely what's happening is we're experiencing that from wounding. And so in our healthy, fully expressed phosphorus, because there's the wounding of her, but once we heal and alchemize her, she will then be holding a torch for others. Once she's done the work to discover her unique gifts through that discovery process of alchemy, and once she's learnt to express them in the world, she'll be that radiant expression of the fully reclaimed healer. And yet, before we've got to that point, and there's a whole journey of becoming that point, becoming that person, becoming that woman, that radiant, gorgeous, open, sensitive, like magical, here I am, I'm a healer, like radiant woman. Like before we get to that, phosphorus will likely experience her wounds. And she will burn down because of sensitivity. So she needs to learn how to work with reclaiming that. The wounds of phosphorus tend to be, for example, that you're a woman who's so over living like a dull grey kind of ashy, unfulfilling life. And you'll likely feel that very deep ungrounding, like this sense of busy chaos and drama, constantly putting out fires. You know you want to create life differently, but there's this sense of like just not quite being able to. Like you might feel more than others. You'll be overwhelmed by that sensitivity, like to noise, lights, odours, touch, electricity, people, other worlds. And also emotions. So no matter how hard you try to shove feelings down, because likely phosphorus kind of shames herself for those, often she will tend to like try and be positive and force positivity, but she'll often explode like fire with her fiery, anxious emotions. Fire is a great representation of phosphorus as an archetype. Another way that phosphorus has wounds is that her mind's kind of hyper vigilantly focused on predicting future problems and trying to solve them. So again, this is another particular archetypal remedy state, which I'd say is archetypal quartz. Like there's this brilliance in phosphorus, but she will also kind of overuse that brilliance very logically. So she'll kind of either like find a logical way to distract and numb from her problems, or find some kind of quick fixes, and she'll feel this kind of sense of disconnection from her body. She will also struggle to communicate her needs and run around people pleasing at the expense of her own energy. So she'll find it hard to implement boundaries and feel kind of emotional, resentful, shameful, guilty. We're going to be talking a little bit more to this today. And also there would be a sense of like low energy, nervous exhaustion, perhaps like fatigue, tension, pain, numbness, often womb symptoms as well in phosphorus, and mysterious disorders. And there's often this sense of like there being this hidden underlying pattern to heal. But overall, there will also be this like deep sense, this deep desire for something more, this kind of fiery passion, if you like, that may be kind of hidden beyond a load of layers, but there's still this sense of like there's something more meaningful to life than this. There's something more heart-led, there's something more purposeful. Like my soul came here for a deeper reason, perhaps to be a healer, teacher, or guide. But there's this like, yeah, there's this deep kind of sense that there's something more, that there's some sort of possibility that you're not currently living out. And as I said, there's almost like two ways that this episode could have gone, because there could have been this whole episode around phosphorus, because phosphorus has this deep sensitivity. Like there's no taking that away. Like, and learning to work with her is serving, if nothing else, but to just illuminate, okay, this is me, this is who I was born as. And it's also helpful because it helps you see that if you resonate with being archetypal phosphorus, you were literally born here to be a healer. It makes sense why we'd suffer with burnout, being so open to other worlds, and the challenges of feeling that others naturally absorb our energy. It also helps us to see where there's possibility to reclaim this kind of radiant version of ourselves who shines a torch as a healer, shines her gifts into the world, this kind of radiant, alive, full of life force, full of energy. This is phosphorus in her healthy state, is like fully topped up, fully charged, fully expressed, fully living her magical purpose, following her desire, following what lights her up, full of passion for the meaningful work that you came here to do. So it's like this is a remedy in her golden, alchemized, healed state, who is deeply energetic. Like you'll probably find that if you are someone who's phosphoric, you may well feel burned out, but it's because you also can hold a lot. Like you probably have spent your life holding a lot. Like this phosphorus isn't just energetically sensitive and like really weak. Like she's super powerful. It's just that she's kind of like burnt out through taking on so much. And so it's helpful to see that, because that's literally who you were born to be if you're feeling those wounds. And your sensitivity, whilst it comes with those wounds, and you're probably in the work of experiencing those wounds unconsciously, because that's kind of how our mundane society kind of has phosphoric women feel, is that we also have a gift in that. There's a gift of phosphorus in that we would not be here to be healers. We wouldn't have the skill set, the natural personality profiling, the natural gifts of being a healer without it. And yet most phosphoric healers will shame this gift. They will feel a sense of disapproval if they think about honouring their energy, honouring their needs. And it leaves them fearing their openness instead. So, in other words, phosphorus as an archetypal remedy is scared to fully honour her deep sensitivity as the gift it is. And sometimes she will shame it, she will not meet her sensitive needs. And then that means ultimately she can't step into her radiance because she's not honouring her body's needs. Another way of saying that is we can't pour from an empty cup. You know, radiance, to be fully radiant, we have to be like grounded in honouring our needs. And so we need that in order to fully express as this beautiful phosphoric healer. And so that was one way I could take the episode. And I've kind of taken it that way a little bit because I think there's some like foundational pieces there, given it's constitutional. It's like the collective of the healer. And this other remedy, so their archetypal remedy, came in to demand to be talked about. And I'll be honest, I have no idea where she's going to take it. She's hijacked the episode. I think she may have even hijacked the crucible that we're going to run next, the group journey. And she literally was snapping at my heels. I went out for a walk yesterday to feel into like what remedies next. And I asked a question and then instantly was like, oh, okay. Okay. So yeah, she demanded that this was what was happening, and I instantly again I was like, oh, this is inconvenient, and I did my best to cage her because she felt inconvenient. She wasn't due to be expressed until autumn, but this remedy is having none of it. So before I tell you what that remedy is, phosphorus has a set of what I call remedy relationships, just to put this into a bit of context for you. So it's like, well, why wouldn't I just serve phosphorus in this episode? And it's like, phosphorus ultimately is a constitution. What I find when people are just taking those kind of tender steps in, and this is intentionally designed, by the way, it's been inbuilt into my modality based on the laws of healing, which I'll talk more about, that the way that I serve and what's aligned to serve and what I've been guided to serve by these kind of universal laws and in alignment with those is that we serve what's called some common surface wounds. So there's 4 layers in my soul map. And one of those layers of remedies is the surface wound remedies. What that means is there's some remedies that phosphorus or the constitution, whatever yours is, will have a relationship to some surface wound remedies that need healing in order for you to fully express who you were born to be, i.e. phosphorus. So there will be these kind of surface wound archetypal remedy states that we go into. And these are kind of the first layers. We talk about the law of direction of cure and the law of layers that we tend to heal in. These are the first layers that we tend to heal as we step into the path. And as we do, those layers will begin to peel back more and show us and reveal more of our soul and how to embody phosphorus or our inner healer more clearly. If you imagine, the best way to describe it, these 4 layers of the soul plan, and the soul plan is kind of like the piece at the centre that kind of ties the modality together, is we all have this unique soul plan. We all have 4 layers of archetypal remedies. And if you imagine yourself as like an onion, and there's different layers of different remedy states. And so right at the core of this onion is archetypal phosphorus or your constitution, whatever that is. And then we have different layers that have layered over that. The second layer is what I would call your core wound. This is the wound in childhood that's like the deepest wound. That is your gift. That is what you're here. It's almost like your niche or who you're here to serve as well. But like there's a deep process of reclamation of what that wound is. But like that's the next layer. And then there's also these kind of surface layers. There's 2 more layers. So there's the constitution, there's your soul remedy, and then there's surface layer and ancestral layer wounds. Now the ancestral layer wounds are essentially the wounds that have been carried down through our ancestors, through our families. And the surface layer wounds are kind of like those surface layers that we need to peel back in order to get to the real gold in the middle, in order to become who we were born here to be, in essence, phosphorus, the archetypal healer. And so that's important context because the remedy that came in was a surface wound layer, and I'd been contemplating serving phosphorus. Part of me still is, because I'm still like, oh, do I have to honour the wild wolf? I can't, and I just know that I can't contain her, so it's like, oh, it's a choiceless choice, really. But one of the surface layer wounds that helps a phosphoric soul to heal one of these surface layer wounds around sensitivity is the remedy she-wolf, or Looper, as we call her. Now, the reason for this is largely what typically happens when a woman is so open and sensitive and in shame of her sensitivity, not owning it as the gift it is she's completely dishonouring her boundaries, in particular her inner boundaries, and I'll talk more to that. But what that means is she is dismissing her wild wolf no. And we cannot fully express our radiant yes, our radiant phosphorus, our radiant healer, our desires. We can't create from our desires until we've fully honoured our inner wild wolf no. And so in many ways, in this way, the 2 remedies of phosphorus and she-wolf kind of work together in wounding. So it's like phosphorus has no boundaries at all. She's like, nope, I don't even know what boundary is. So open. I always remember being in a crucible myself, a journey myself with my own soul guide and other women. And there was this time where I felt so rejected and felt completely like cut out of the circle. And just like people were honouring their no, they were like, no, no, no. And I was like, I don't understand. And I was feeling so rejected and so abandoned. And it really taught me, like, oh my goodness, like, I am phosphorus. These other women may or may not have been phosphorus, but there were different kind of archetypal remedies in that group. And I remember just really feeling like, oh, this is phosphorus. Like, to me, it just did not make sense to have that kind of boundary. Like, there was no chance that I would ever have like rejected someone to the degree I felt I was being rejected at the time. And there was huge healing alchemy in that. It was a very, very triggering experience. And like, it just reminded me of the gift of phosphorus in many ways, that there's like this no sense of, like, she can feel deeply closed, and she can be like the kind of wild wolf, like rebel, but there's still always this kind of openness and sensitivity to her. And it just showed me like there's really no boundaries often in phosphorus. Or what can also happen is like she can rebel. So what tends to be the pattern with she-wolf is like there's this kind of good girl or rebel vibe, and I'll talk more to that. But it's like phosphorus has no boundaries at all. She kind of needs some sense of inner no in order to live and function in the world as the sensitive, magical woman she is. And so she-wolf comes in and shows us all the places we need to honour our boundaries, all the reasons that we aren't honouring our boundaries. And that's the reason we would work with her. Like, what is she going to reveal to us? Now, why wouldn't we just work directly with phosphorus, given she's a remedy that is so clearly also here to help us work with sensitivity? As I said, there's this kind of method built into the way that I guide women. And my modality is grounded in 3 ancient wisdom bodies of homeopathy, archetypal psychology, and energy healing. But it's also grounded in ancient universal laws of healing. And I think this is important to illuminate. And I'm intending to do an episode on this entirely, because I feel like it's super interesting. But there's like this deeper laws that guide the way that I work. And the way that I've always worked as a homeopath, although this isn't me serving homeopathy in the traditional sense, like, it's informed, and my experience working with women for healing has informed this. And the laws are, there's different laws. Law of order of direction of cure, which is very much informing how these remedies are served in this way. The law of similars, which is the one that I talked about earlier, like cures like. The law of potency, like how much of what remedy do people need at what time, and everybody will have a different energetic like potency requirements. Some women will be really, really burned out in phosphorus, and they might need less potency, so a lower potency, than someone who isn't as burned out. But it doesn't always work like that, because there's also like different energetic kind of constitutions. So you might be like deeply able to hold a high potency remedy even if you are burned out, and therefore you can work with that. That's too much detail to go into for this right now. You don't need to know that, but it's a law that kind of underlies and also is really helpful as a healer to know how to serve different potencies of women as well. So that's something that I teach women more in my one-to-one work. But there's the law of minimum single dose, which is the law that we work with one remedy at a time. And I'm not going to talk more about that. There's loads I could say about all of that. And there's the law of layers as well, which is about this kind of these 4 different layers. And in my experience, and the law of healing and the layers and direction of cure in particular, I serve some of the surface layer wounds first before we work with the constitution directly. And this is really to provide healing in alignment with the principle of Hahnemann and his homeopathic philosophy. He says that any cure should be rapid, gentle, and permanent. And that in order to provide that, they have to be served in a particular way. And so when sensitive women work directly with phosphorus before maybe the remedy she-wolf, if that's what they need, and that isn't necessarily true for everyone, it could be that phosphorus is deeply aligned, and it may well be that I serve phosphorus at some point in time if that feels deeply aligned. And just right now, she-wolf in particular is coming through really strongly, and is also being revealed in other group crucibles that I'm journeying with. So very much reactive to the energy that wants to be channeled through for the collective at the time. But if we work, for some women, when we work directly with phosphorus before we've maybe worked with another remedy, and it really depends on your own situation as to what that map kind of looks like, it can just be that bit too potent. So we work in an order of the remedy relationships. If, by the way, you're hearing this and thinking, oh, what if I shouldn't work with this remedy? Know that if you're being called there, it's likely that that is exactly what the medicine is for you. Like, you will know if you're meant to work with that remedy or not by the kind of sensations in your body. Like, if you feel that deep sense of soul alignment, that is absolutely to be honoured. But in the way that I'm serving them, like, I'm really mindful of the way that I serve them. So we work in order of the remedy relationships, the particular unique remedies that women have. The surface wounds I serve being those that are most common to women born here to be healers. Though you'll also have your own particular unique soul map, as I was saying, of archetypal remedies that have other remedies as well. So it may be that you're here for, Rosa, Aurum, She-Wolf, Luna, and any of the others that are common to the surface wounds, but there also will likely be specific ones that are unique to you. Likewise, specific ancestral remedies, likewise, particularly your own unique soul remedy, which is your deepest wound. And like I say, it may or may not be phosphoric constitution. So if you do want to know what those are, you can also book a soul reading, which is like a human design or a gene keys tool, but with your own unique map of archetypal remedies. And that shows you, it's like a clear roadmap of where your healing and gifts are. So that aside, all that said, She-Wolf is one of the remedies that can really have a deep healing for women around this kind of dishonouring of our sensitivity. And the sense of like having to protect our energy as well. And it actually helps us to protect our energy, but not maybe in the way that I'm describing it there. So who is archetypal She-Wolf then? Or archetypal Lupa, as she's called in Latin. So her actual remedy name is Lac Lupinum. And rather than the energy of She-Wolf herself, it's actually the energy of She-Wolf's mother's milk. And this is an important distinction because I think there's so many expressions of, since, Clarissa Pinkola Estes as well, and I'm a huge fan of her work, and she is very much the She-Wolf's energy, but there's particularly a distinction between the She-Wolf and the She-Wolf's mother's milk in that she is a matrodonal remedy. And what I mean by that, she's a matrodonal queendom remedy. She is a mother remedy. So with that, the kind of gold of the mother, the ultimate symbol of like real deep nurturing, self-nurturing, nurturing of others, like, but in a way that's really healthy. And so she's kind of like that ultimate symbol of our animalistic, wild expression, our truth, our raw truth, but in a nurturing, wild, feminine way. So she's like a mama to her cubs. And she's kind of like wild, truthful, instinctual, very much in tune with her feminine nature and spirit, her own cycles and rhythms of her natural habitat and body. And we can also learn her themes from mythology, which is said to have nursed and sheltered twins Romulus and Remus, where they were abandoned in the wilderness. So she's a symbol of the ultimate unconditional motherly nurturer, the sacred symbol of like being with our true voice, our wild soul expression, even when it doesn't make any sense, which is why I'm chuckling to myself when I was like, oh, She-Wolf wants to come in spring rather than autumn. Because typically she's an autumnal remedy. Like there's this kind of deep sense in autumn of like the shift from the summer, which is like, yay, this is all like nice and shiny and summery and light, into like we're moving towards winter. And it's like, no. But yeah, she's like, no, this is what I'm doing. Like there's this wildness, like even when it makes no sense, of Lac Lupinum of the She-Wolf. So this is a woman, if you need to work with this remedy, and I suspect if you're listening to this, this is you, and this is the medicine that She-Wolf kind of heals and alchemizes. There's usually this deep call to living your wild soul truth. And yet you're easily distracted from that by this mother wounding of being pulled into every other direction by others. This kind of sense of like giving our energy to others innocently, absorbing other people's energy, in that we're constantly giving our energy out as well. And she will often feel this split between playing the good girl or the rebel, because she feels on the edge of society. She's like the lone wolf, and there's this kind of sense of being like a trapped free spirit in a disconnected world, this kind of sense of restriction, this sense of taming. And she can sometimes then rebel with an expression that isn't really true. So she can have this kind of snappy side, this critical, blaming others, and also kind of like just deeply sensitive. The she-wolf herself, think about how instinctive she is. She has this deep sensitivity in her body to what's aligned, but tends to ignore and override it. So there's this sense of, like, again, just being completely open, ignoring her own boundaries, and therefore giving our energy away to others. So it's interesting, this, as I'm thinking about it, it's almost like this sense of, like, we think that it's others who are taking our energy, like we're absorbing their energy in some way, which is part of the phosphorus picture. But there's also this like deeper layer of like us innocently giving out our energy to other people, so that, which is kind of like having that impact, that ripple impact into us feeling like we're too sensitive. Innocently. And so she has this deep sensitivity, but she will often override it and ignore it. And so she will also mistrust her feminine body. She'll ignore and shame the guttural calls of her body, soul, and wild intuition. She mistrusts and doesn't feel safe around others. She fears being hunted. She fears being taken advantage of. And I think this is where this fear around like other people taking our energy and us absorbing their energy is very much the she-wolf picture. So there's this sense of like people pleasing, over mothering others, losing our character, losing our voice to fit in. There's this big approval piece, suppressing our emotions, especially sacred rage, a fear of speaking our truth, or our emotions might come out like this harsh wolf bite meltdown when angry or emotional. Often when we are kind of feeling we're absorbing others' energies, and when we do absorb, we're so sensitive that we will naturally take on other people, we'll pick up on people's energies, but then we'll almost like take that energy in for ourselves and then express it. I've experienced that myself, where we kind of be in the energy of others and then have this like sense of like rage and angry meltdown when we weren't even feeling like that before. And then like fear honouring our no, or aggressively setting no's in a way that doesn't feel loving. Fears being seen as too wild or too much. Fears persecution. So there's a sense of like wanting to stay approved of, therefore suppressing our truth. Feeling a sense of disconnection from our body's rhythms, our wild truth. And also can often have this like yearning for the wild, yearning for nature, yearning for being out in the outdoors. And that is one of the ways, because we used to be wild animals, we still are wild animals who would have been like wolves, living in the outdoors, living in nature. We're very much deeply connected to nature. And yet now we've been kind of disconnected from that, put in little square boxes. And there's this sense of like real deep disconnection from the wild, from our wild natural state. And when we're in that, our sensitivity will be even more impacted. Like when we're not grounded in nature, when we're not outdoors, we are going to naturally absorb things that we're not able to ground and protect from. And then there can also be some bonding or disconnection with our own mother, like feeling that we didn't receive the nourishment that we needed. That's part of the wounded expression of she-wolf. In her alchemized state, she-wolf knows how to fully honour her truth, but from unconditional love. So we'll talk to that a little bit, because both the good girl and the rebel are both wounds of she-wolf. And we can become this full, loving, wild expression of our soul, but with this very loving energy of that motherly, nurturing part of the she-wolf aspect. And she-wolf's in deep communion with her body, in her emotions. She has, the most important thing is that she honours and knows her body rhythms, her independent needs, and her boundaries. And we'll talk about inner and outer boundaries, but she is able to then vulnerably share those boundaries and at whatever cost, really honour them. And so whilst phosphorus really is the kind of main remedy who feels that openness and also feels that sense of like giving away our energy or taking on people's energy, what she-wolf helps us to do is to begin to learn how to honour our inner wild no, and our boundaries, which is something that sensitive ones can really struggle with, so that we can then rise into working to reclaim and heal our full phosphoric expression as a healer. That radiance. Like, we need to know how to honour our wild no so that we can be in that wild, beautiful, radiant yes of phosphorus. And yeah, it's kind of like we need to learn to embody our inner wolf and her boundaries before we can fully open to our desires, our passion, our radiance. Otherwise, we'll just end up leaking our energy on that and being of service to others, like absorbing everything that comes our way without any kind of like inner boundary. Like, there's no sense of being able to go out. Like, we need to come in before we can go out, even though like we stay open. There's like a paradox here, because the remedies that I teach and what I teach about being feminine healers is we don't need a sense of closure. Like, there's a way of staying open in the beautiful gift of phosphorus whilst also having that kind of honouring. So it's not a sense of closure, because my whole path, as I mentioned, teaches about opening, softening, receiving. I teach the rose, for example, about opening into full bloom. And if we're opening to full bloom, she-wolf's not coming in to tell us to close and protect and guard. Like, there's this sense often as well with Aurum, gold is like having to put on this armour to protect ourselves from the world. Like, this isn't what we're about when we're talking about teaching. We're talking about reclaiming our sensitivity. What we're talking about is learning how to stay open whilst also being deeply self-honouring. And that is what's missing in our world, in our mundane world. This is why phosphorus will struggle to fit into the mundane world, because there's not this deep self-honouring, and not even just self-honouring, but soul-honouring. Like, that needs to be fully embodied, our inner boundaries, before we can open. It's like there's almost like this energetic containment, if you like, this kind of like holding of ourselves, this grounding, is learning how to focus our energy consciously and intentionally with inner boundaries, which we begin with Aurum sometimes, and then also she becomes cemented, and we can begin in she-wolf as well, or Lupa's remedy. But when I say boundaries, I think this is a really important distinction here, is I'm not meaning that, when I say boundaries, I'm not meaning boundaries as we know them. Boundaries as we know them in the mainstream, boundaries as we know them even in spiritual healing teachings. There's often this sense, when we talk about boundaries, of closure, of guarding, of protecting, of putting on that armour. Like, right, I've got my boundaries in place now. I'm going to guard, I'm going to close, I'm going to shield. And that can often be like, that is kind of like, there's as the she-wolf is known in society, or as the wolf, the wild woman, if you say, the wild woman archetype. That's how she's known, is this sense of like, right, fuck you then, I've got my boundaries up. There's this sense of like guarding. And that's not what she-wolf invites us into, particularly Laclupinum, the mother's milk. There's a way that we can really honour our no, our inner boundaries, in a loving way, not from rebel. I remember one woman once telling me that she was riding a tiger, shimmying her ass at anybody that came her way and told her no. And I'm like, that's not the energetic that we're talking about here. That's the rebel. That's the rebel in shadow. Bless her heart. All welcome. Totally welcome. All is welcome in my crucibles, in my journeys, and all is welcome in my space. And I also know that I've been there, so I have no judgment. I'm fully loving the part of me that was also a rebel. And there's a way to heal and alchemize that and become the she-wolf, our wild expression from vulnerable, loving truth, and honour our inner boundaries in a way that is deeply honouring, deeply nurturing of self and others. As I mentioned, she-wolf is one of the matridonal queendom remedies, which means she's part of the mother remedy group of archetypal remedies. There's lots of different groups of remedies, like minerals or animals, which she-wolf also is animalistic, but she's also part of the mother remedies because of this matridonal, this motherly aspect of her milk. And so she has that kind of theme of deep honouring, deep nurturing of self and others. So there's this deep motherly love, nurturing, deep vulnerability, and how she meets herself in her sensitivity. She'll ask the questions like, what does my body need? What does my inner little girl need me to hear? What are my inner knows? And how can I vulnerably express and find a way to meet that in the world? How can I begin to more deeply hear my body's wild signals? How can I hear my own wild needs? How can I speak my wild inner truth with deep love in a way that is heard? What are my inner boundaries and where am I not meeting them? And this last one is super important, and it's super important nuance, because as I said, what will often happen is, as sensitive souls who do absorb others' energy and have this sense of like also leaking our own energy, we will burn out because we either completely merge with the energy of another and take on all of their stuff, or we will rebel against someone and set these kind of like harsh outer boundaries that dishonor everyone. Usually that's where most people have been before they arrive at my door, is like this harsh setting of outer boundaries, either that or not having any boundaries at all, which is kind of like the good girl versus the rebel. Those tend to be the places where women have journeyed before they arrive at my door. But there is this often sense of like, right, I'm going to set a harsh outer boundary, and this sense of like doing it in a really like wild, sometimes dishonoring way. And there's a hard truth to be within that, and I've journeyed that myself. So again, there's absolutely no judgment of that. But really, what's real gold in this is that our outer boundaries are a reflection of how far we've actually met our own internal inner energetic boundaries. So often we can kind of set these harsh outer boundaries and get really cross that they've not been met until we look at how well we've met our internal energetic boundary, because often there will be this sense of like a cost with honouring our inner boundary. I'm thinking of one that comes up for healers quite commonly is this sense of like, for example, if they're serving someone and maybe they're coming to them for an alchemy call to discover like whether there's an alignment to work with them, or they're coming to an appointment just in general, and they just completely don't show up. Often healers can then be like, oh my God, like what's going on? Why do people do this? And it's really an expression of like there's been an outer boundary maybe honoured. Maybe there was this sense of like you must be on time, or you need 24 hours notice to cancel. Often there can be this kind of caveat in that. But if you're not really honouring your inner boundary on what you're available for, that's where the deep work is. So, for example, you might have already moved that appointment that was there for somebody. They might have already not showed once and you've renewed it. It's like, where was your inner boundary on that first piece? And often, even though that can kind of transcribe into like an outer boundary, there's like the moment that we shift our inner boundaries and see what's there for us and own how we haven't met our own inner boundaries energetically, like the world shifts to meet us. It really is. Like I remember this happening for myself, and like really starting to see where I was creating that by not meeting my inner boundary. And so She-Wolf will ask, like, where are we dishonouring ourselves? Where are we dishonouring our own wild no? And more importantly, why? What's the deeper fear? Like, is it the fear of losing approval and becoming the lone wolf? Is it the fear of losing security? Is it fear of losing control? And often with She-Wolf, it tends to be approval. There's this deep sense of our wildness being totally unacceptable, our truth being totally disallowed, like too much, our no being too wild, our no being rejected, our true fullness being rejected, our full expression being rejected. And so hence she becomes the good girl, the people pleaser, and later has enough of that and flips into rebel. And often that really is one of the biggest energy leaks that will have us burn out as a sensitive phosphoric one. And so that's why She-Wolf's kind of looper remedy is so needed before we work directly with phosphorus herself. She will begin the healing that kind of lays the foundation for us to fully embody phosphorus. When we have our inner boundaries in place, the world shifts and meets us. I remember going through the painful journey of honouring my inner boundaries, and still do at times, like beginning to see how unbelievably, as I did that, the world shifted to meet me. And in doing so, it freed up so much energy, which meant in turn, I then wasn't as drained by others and didn't burn out and was available to hold other energies. And in truth, also, others are only ever really showing us where our energy is being leaked. That's a whole other story to go into. And there are so many ways that this episode could have gone, but the energy of She-Wolf felt deeply important to honour. The other thing I wanted to say actually is that overall, I think it was helpful to know as we navigate the journey with reclaiming energy too, and also with guarding energy, is that we're all made up of energy. So it's almost like no need to guard. Like there's no more or less energy. We are energy. Where we can get kind of burned out and feel like we need to guard is that we're kind of in the shadow or wounding of some of these remedy states. Let me explain more on what I mean by that. We each have our own unique map of energetic remedies that we're living at a time. So we talked about the soul map. These archetypal remedies aren't just something that you suddenly decide to work with, like, oh, I feel called to work with She-Wolf, let's go and embody her. Like, if you're called to She-Wolf, it's because She-Wolf is part of you already in wounding. Like, your own soul map of remedies is already living you. It's just likely that they're living you from their wounding. So, for example, if Aurum is one of your remedies and living you, she will be living you through her sense of powerlessness, or maybe her sense of being a tyrant and fearing her powers too much. Luna will be living you through your fear of your magical gifts. She-Wolf will be living you through this kind of good girl or rebel tendency that you have. So they're already happening. Like, these remedies are already within us. And all we're doing when we're in the work of healing with them is reclaiming their gold, is doing the deep work to reclaim their gold, to harness their energy from gold, from healthiness, rather than from wounding. And so they're largely living us through our unconscious wounding. So one of the deepest ways of healing our energy is through illuminating where we are in the shadow of archetypal remedies, so that we can consciously choose to reclaim their gold, to claim the healing of She-Wolf and honour our boundaries. And the reason this is important is because wounding is where our energy goes to. Other people are really just a mirror. So if we're feeling our energy drained by someone else, it's likely that what they're actually doing is holding up a mirror to an aspect of us that we need to reclaim, a wounded aspect of us, where our energy is being leaked because we haven't looked at it. So they're acting as mirrors. So if we're drained by other people, it's because we're so sensitive, and we're also kind of seeing, like, having reflected to us, like, where our wounding is. And because we're sensitive, we'll be more sensitive to seeing that. And so it's showing us where we're suppressing ourselves, which also takes so much energy. It takes so much energy to operate from our wounding, and She-Wolf is very much that reclamation of our truth. So the more that we can heal and alchemize our wounds, the more energy we will have. And that is so important. That's where this work of healing ourselves first, if we're thinking of feeling that call to becoming a healer, is so important. Like, we need to heal ourselves first in order to become healers, because the more energy we can reclaim for ourselves, so that we're no longer operating from our wounding unconsciously, the more energy we then have to meet others. The more full our cup is, the more we are able to honour those inner boundaries, because it's really difficult to honour any boundaries when we're not full, when we're operating from a depleted place. Like, we need to honour our boundaries, our inner boundaries, with love and openness, and that also has us know how to not absorb others' energy. We can work with protecting ourselves with ritual, with other practices, like with the embodiment of She-Wolf, but the real deep inner work is where the healing is. So, for example, She-Wolf likes to go out into the wild and ground herself, which is a practice that connects you back into your wild body, embodiment being one of the 8 elements of the archetypal apothecary path. And there's a whole journey with the embodiment of She-Wolf. But some of her deepest work first is in asking the questions and looking truthfully at where we are in her wounding. For example, some inquiries that I'm going to leave you with for this at the end of this episode is just some simple pieces. So firstly, where do you resonate with the shadow and gold themes of She-Wolf? Like, where do you resonate with her themes? What's she revealing to you? What's your relationship with good girl and rebel? And where do you resonate with your wild loving expression, her gold? Another question is, what are the costs and benefits of beginning to work with She-Wolf and embody her gold versus staying where you are? What does it cost you to not be honouring your inner boundaries, in essence? And what are the benefits of not embodying your inner boundaries? It's also quite a good question about the kinky pleasures that we get from these things. And then the third question is, will you choose to work with this remedy to illuminate where her themes show up in your life? Such a juicy one. And as I said, there could be so many different ways that this episode goes, because there is a whole bunch of stuff around phosphorus, but I always tend to choose like one remedy to focus on in each episode. Whether I declare it or not, that's typically what I'm doing, is serving one particular remedy. And it just really felt like She-Wolf's medicine when we're talking about, like, just without burning out, how to be a healer as a sensitive soul who absorbs others' energy without burning out. Like, we need the foundation for that before we even start to think about like phosphorus is really in that kind of reclaiming of our inner boundaries and lovingly. So I am going to leave that there. If you're wanting to go deeper with this, we have got an upcoming journey coming in May, so take a look at our website to see which one I ended up honouring. I have a feeling it could be She-Wolf, although there may well, you never know with these remedies, they may well pop in the meantime. Have a look and see what you think. And we will see you there. Be delighted. In other news, you can also join our Secret Witch Society. There's a beautiful community in there. We meet monthly to have a gorgeous new moon ritual gathering with other like-minded souls. So if that feels like a tender first step, then please do join us, and I will see you soon. Lots of love. Live in action there with She-Wolf. Here are my takeaways. Sensitivity is one of the things that most aspiring healers who are constitutionally archetypal phosphorus shame about themselves, and fear will stop them becoming healers. Yet it also holds a deep gift. Without sensitivity, we wouldn't even be healers. To begin healing this surface layer wound of sensitive phosphoric women and to stop absorbing energy and burning out, we need to work with the archetypal remedy She-Wolf or Lupa, and especially the motherly energy of the milk of the She-Wolf, which is about reclaiming our inner wildness and honouring our inner boundaries in a nurturing way from love. We will often fear our inner wild will be rejected as too much, too wild, or be disapproved of or judged, and so we, as sensitive women, often deny our true needs and burn ourselves into the ground. And it's at this point where other people's energy will just feel too much. Other people are only ever acting as mirrors for aspects of ourselves that want reclaiming. If we learn to receive triggers from others, taking our energy as a call to honour our true needs as sensitive women, we can too heal and open to reclaiming our gifts as healers. Outer boundaries are often set first, and then we get upset when they're dishonoured by others. Yet the really deep work is to learn to honour our own inner boundaries for ourselves. The world shifts as we do. The work is to begin to hear our inner wild no, so that we can then begin to open to our true deep yes, to the desire and vision of becoming the healer that we were born to be. Otherwise, we will end up burning out, pleasing everyone and taking on everything from everyone else. If you'd like to get the show notes and links for everything we've chatted about in this episode, head to www.secretwitch.co.uk. If you know a secret witch who would love this episode, please share with them to help them liberate themselves. And so you don't miss out on next week's episode, head to your podcast app of choice and hit subscribe. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time.